Good evening, viewers, and welcome to another edition of Community Corner here on Acts 25. It's always a pleasure to be in your company every Thursday afternoon between the hours of 6 and 6:30, where we will bring you something from the community or something that is relevant that is happening in our country. Today we have a very special gentleman with us, and we have a special edition program here, which you're going to be actually getting two parts of this interview. The first part of the interview will be dealing with the adventure, and the second part, well, I don't want to say what the second part entails because this gentleman is a keynote speaker. And you know keynote speakers, when they start to talk, you know, there is so much they have to offer. But let me take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Neal Petersen from South Africa.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me in the studio and on the show.
Yes. Now, Mr. Petersen is the first black man to sail around, not say actually sail, to race around the world. Solo by himself. He's also a global entrepreneur, and as I said before, a keynote speaker. And I'm sure by the time we finish the interview, you will discover that he has a lot of other talents. So again, welcome to Acts 25 and welcome to Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, it's good to be back in Trinidad.
Now, tell me a bit, if I'm to ask you briefly, who is Neal Petersen?
Well, I was born in South Africa, and I'm a dreamer. I'm a man who turns dreams into reality. And when you ask who, my job is to inspire people. I grew up in poverty in South Africa, a working class family, an alcoholic father who unfortunately could not hold down a job, became a laborer in a factory. A mother was a school teacher, and we did not have much money in my family. I grew up in apartheid South Africa, and this was during the era of the freedom of Nelson Mandela and trying to fight for one person, one vote and equality in the country. And I also grew up physically disabled, but I had a dream. I had a dream that I wanted to own a yacht and race around the world one day.
Tell us about the disabled part. I know that you had a challenge. Tell us about how you overcome that challenge.
So when I was 18 months of age, it was discovered that I was born without the socket in the ball and socket joint. And I went through 3 major surgeries. And that last surgery was at age 5, and it left me in a body cast from my ankle to my chest. If I wanted to see a different view, a nurse or doctor actually physically had to pick me up and shift me around. So again, because of modern medicine, and you've got to remember, South Africa, this was a country that was segregated. My hospitals were segregated. I was in the coloureds only part of the hospital. But South Africa has been a country that's always been on the cutting edge of medicine. The very first heart transplant took place in Cape Town, in my hometown. So they did an amazing job on fixing my leg up.
How long did you stay in that bodysuit?
I was in a body cast for about 4 or 5 months, a long time. And as I said, it was from my ankle to my chest. If I wanted to see a different view, a doctor or a nurse or mom physically had to pick me up and shift me. I could not shift myself. But it was during that period that I was introduced to books. And my world has been changed by books. And at first, as a 5-year-old, I was too young to look at these magazines. And a doctor brought in these sailing magazines. And I could not read the words, but the pictures. And a picture paints 1,000 words, because I saw photographs of yachts gliding through the water. And my dad had spoken about his time at sea, and we lived in a coastal community. Part of our community were fishermen. So I was drawn to the boats and drawn to the sea, but there were also pictures of tropical waters, sandy white beaches, palm trees, which could have been Tobago, which I still have to see. But I ended up getting to live the dream of having ultimately the yacht and having the ability to spend time here in the Caribbean, as I've done many other different things. But what those photographs gave me was hope. And hope is the energy of change.
At what age did you realize that the dream was coming to be a reality?
Well, when I was around age 11, I ended up going to the whites-only public library. And our libraries were segregated, and so the library that I was supposed to go to did not have books on the sea. But those books were in the library across the railway line. So I ended up hobbling up to that library. I worked with calipers at that point in my life. And I ended up reading a book by Joshua Slocum, the first man to sail solo around the world. And he went via the Southern Ocean, some of the Southern Ocean capes, and he spoke about his adventures. And I knew at that moment, I wanted to be a yachtsman. I wanted to own a boat. I wanted to sail and see the world. And I'd built a treehouse. And I used to sit in my treehouse and read my books. And the treehouse became my imaginary ship, because the tree would sway in the wind, and the treehouse would groan like you're on an old wooden ship and make the sounds, but the swing of the tree felt like I was on the rolling seas. And so I was able to imagine what it's like to be out there, and that imagination. It wasn't the days of iPods and video games, etc. My world was the world I could create, not the world that was created for me or given to me through a television set or given to me through electronic gaming, but by imagination. And I built upon that. And I think today our children are being robbed of creativity and imagination because they're becoming dependent upon technology. They're not using technology to further themselves, but to escape. And I think we are losing. And I think the era of the adventure, the true adventurer, and here in Trinidad, you've had a family, Harold Labon, who sailed around the world twice at different stages. And they were true adventurers. They did it the same way with a sextant. And it hadn't changed for hundreds of years in some of the ways they had done it. They did it in a home-built boat as well. And today we have reality TV. You've got a whole crew and you've got people doing crazy things, but then you've got the food truck and the safety truck and everyone goes to the hotel, and this is not living.
But I want you to explain to the viewers, Laborde and them sail around, you race.
Yes.
I want you to explain to the viewers the difference, because there were people be saying, now, okay, this one did it and this one did it, but they sail and you race.
Well,
so is it actually that you were just at full throttle around the world?
It was a flat out push. And there were several events. I grew up knocking on hulls and asking people to take me sailing. And eventually I got into the water, and the boats I got onto were race boats, because on race morning they needed crew. And if somebody didn't show up, they were one person short. I was that enthusiastic, I want to be on your boat, teach me, help me. And that's how I got into the world of racing. But I also came to realize that if I want to really be a great sailor and to prove myself, I've got to go solo. I've got to be able to do everything on that boat. Whether it is drive the boat, trim the sails, fix the meal, fix the broken equipment on board, navigate. I wanted to learn how to do all of it, and ultimately to lose sight of land and cross oceans. And so I began through racing in the local yacht club. And here in Trinidad, you know, a tremendous opportunity with the Trinidad and Tobago Sailing Association, TTSA down in Chaguaramas. The young children there have been taught how to sail on dinghies, and they have ability to progress onto keel boats. I didn't have the luxury of dinghies. And the doors are wide open at TTSA for the public to come out there and be on these boats. I had to fight down and break down the doors to get onto those boats. But when I was on those boats, I knew ultimately I want to race around the world. Now, there was this event. It was called the BOC Challenge. It was a 27,000-mile solo race around the planet. And when I was around 14 years of age, the first around the world race was taking place, and Cape Town was the first port of call. The race went from America to South Africa, across the Atlantic Ocean, then across the Indian Ocean to Australia, then across the Pacific Ocean around Cape Horn to Uruguay, and then back to the United States. But most of the race is circling Antarctica, circling the icebergs. And in horrendous conditions, hurricane strength winds are fairly common in the Southern Ocean. And you're dealing in the Atlantic Ocean with the trade winds, and you're dealing with the doldrums, so an area of no wind. You're dealing with constantly shifting winds. So the very first race around the world was underway. And when the third competitor arrived in Cape Town, I happened to be on the dock. It was a Sunday morning. It was around 6:30 in the morning when he came ashore, and a small crowd had gathered, and Richard Brodie, he was a British sailor, he looked up at the crowd and he said, I need help, I need a volunteer. You know who was airborne landing on his deck? And after I helped him on the boat cleaning up, I started asking him questions about the boat, about the race, about himself. And he basically saw this spark in my eyes. And he encouraged me. He said, if you want to race around the world, you must do this race called the O-Star. It's a solo race from England to America. You've got to get the experience, you've got to get the knowledge, you've got to find that inner strength. And from that moment forward, around age 14, that was the goal. I was going to race around the world.
Now, I'm hearing all these adventures at age 14. But what about schooling?
Oh, yes. Schooling was a critical component, because without schooling, I would not have a future. My mother was a school teacher, and she basically said, the application of knowledge truly is power. If you think about that for a moment, if you think knowledge is power, then our most powerful people should be our professors. And they are not. They are underpaid educators. And those who have applied the knowledge they've gained from their teachers, from their professors, and taken that application and put it into some form of an organization, a company, empowering other people, have become very successful. So my mother always said, dream and dream big. Don't take no for an answer. Don't look at what you don't have. I mean, I dealt with apartheid, the prejudice. I dealt with the disability. I dealt with the poverty. My mother always said, if you can overcome those things, then whatever else life throws at you, you can overcome that too. And that is up to you to make a difference. She made no excuses for me. She didn't say, oh, you're disabled, so don't worry, you can't do that. She said, you have to work harder than somebody else at something. Life isn't always fair. And if I fell down, she basically said, you get up and you're going to do it again. You keep trying. So to understand a bit about my mother and why she was such a strong woman and such a strong influence that shaped my life so much, you really have to understand her. She went to university in an era when women did not attend high school, let alone go to university. And she just didn't just go to university because she wanted to go to university. She became one of the top students at university in Cape Town. And then she was awarded a scholarship. And she chose to go to Syracuse, New York, the University of Syracuse. And she took a steamship from South Africa to England and then across the Atlantic to the United States, a train to get to Syracuse, New York. And that's where she did her master's. She graduated in 1948. Very few women in the United States attended university at that era. And she was offered many opportunities to teach, to be a professor in the United States, but she chose to return to South Africa, to teach in South Africa, to be a professor, but because of her beliefs in education and that all South Africans must have an education irrespective of race, color, creed, sex. It has to be a level playing ground. This made her a subversive. And so the South African government put her under all kinds of banning orders, house arrest, witch hunted her, and ultimately she was reduced to being a high school teacher. And they thought that that was the end of, they'd silenced my mother. But what they had done, they just put her in the most powerful position. As a teacher, she had all these young minds to shape, to fertilize. And some of her students were brilliant students, and she used to tutor them after school and on weekends. And then at a certain time of the year, she would go and work with the University of Cape Town to obtain medical slots for students. Yeah. And they only allocated so many slots to colored or Indian or black students. And when I talk about myself as a black South African, if you were white, you had the vote. If you opposed apartheid, whether you were white, colored, Indian, Xhosa, Sotho, if you opposed apartheid, we saw ourselves as black South Africans. So she would fight for slots for black South Africans at the university, particularly in the medical school. And then she would win those slots. Then she would go into the business community to obtain scholarship money because our community was impoverished. We didn't have oil revenues. We didn't have wealthy families. We had the concentrated wealth only in a few hands.
What I want to get to now, right? When did you discover or when did you realize that you want to race around the world? I want to find out how you started to, because I know you built your own boat.
Yes,
right?
but to understand that,
yeah.
we need to understand the strength of this woman who inspired me.
Yeah.
And so my mother basically opened up doors for all the students and basically became a beacon for me. And she showed what is possible. And many years later, when I'd become a sportsman, I ended up getting to meet my mom. I flew back to South Africa for a promotion, and she had no breasts. I said, Mom, what happened? And she basically said, well, I had breast cancer. And that was the first I knew about it. And they'd done a double mastectomy and removed her breasts. And she was such a strong woman, she didn't share that with me. Because she knew I had my own set of challenges, and she didn't want to burden me with her challenges. And I said, well, who was there to support you as I was not? And she started to name students. So-and-so became her oncologist. So-and-so became the anesthesiologist. So-and-so was director of nursing. And it was her students who rallied in behind her and provided the best amount of care that no amount of money could buy. She didn't become a teacher because she was going to one day need her students. She became a teacher because she wanted to help her community and make a difference. And it was that difference that she instilled in me. And basically said, whatever your dreams are, it doesn't matter where you've come from. What matters is what are you going to do today to make your world different, to achieve those dreams of the future sooner than later. And so little by little, through reading books, through being around the waterfront, through meeting people like Richard Broadhead, through being curious, I started discovering this world of sailing, of boats, of around the world voyages. And actually, Harold and his wife actually stopped in South Africa during the era I was on the docks, but I don't know how we did not meet.
Okay.
But it was people like Harold who inspired me, who made me realize that there's a big world out there. I could be a part of that world. But I had no money. And I knew I had to find a career to be able to support the boat. And we'll talk about that career in a moment. And then ultimately create my own boat. And then build upon that success. And little by little, the dream to race around the world became more and more firm. At age 14, 15, I knew this is what I wanted to do. My mother didn't say, don't be stupid. You can't do that because you're a kid. My mother said, if you want to be an around-the-world racing sailor, then you have to know these subjects. You've got to excel in school. And she helped me realize the value of schooling in the realization of the dreams, and that I could take proactive steps now, as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, to apply it so that someday when I am that racing sailor, I've learned the lessons. And over at TTSA, I've been working with these young Trinidadian youth and talking to them about their dreams and what they are doing as young leaders in sailing and who's inspiring them as I've been inspired. Because you don't know what seeds are going to be planted. But it's when we are young, when we know what we want, life is a lot easier versus just drifting through and not sure where we're going and just spending a lot of time liming. You know, it's be focused.
We need to take a short break, but when I come back, I want to really focus on your preparation and the moment before you actually decide to race around the world. So you ponder that thought. I'll be back with you shortly. Viewers, this is Community Corner here on Acts 25, and I must say I'm enjoying this special edition of Community Corner here with Mr. Neal Petersen, and we're going to take a short break. We're going to return shortly. Hi, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm George, host of Scoreboard, your Tuesday night sports program on Axe Television Network. Catch me at 8 p.m. with a repeat on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Remember, Scoreboard, real sports, the news, the views, the interviews. Or you can log on to www.axe25tt.com. Remember, Scoreboard, right here on Axe Television Network. Welcome back, viewers. Welcome back to Community Corner. Neal, as we said in the opening, the first part of the interview is going to be the adventure. We heard about the apartheid, the barriers, the challenges. Now we want to hear about the adventure, because surely going solo around the world
filled with challenges and opportunities.
Exactly, because you mentioned there about storms and hurricanes and all this. You have nobody to talk to.
Nope.
Right? You are there by yourself.
Totally by myself.
Right? Let me hear this adventure.
So I ended up building my own boat because I could not raise the money to buy a boat.
What you build that boat out of?
I built it out of wood, cold molded wood, fiberglass. Did not have much equipment. When I began building the boat, I did not have enough money to finish the boat. I had no idea how I was going to finish the boat, but I had faith that I'd figure that out. And I had to end up saying, well, I can have this, or I can have that, but I can't have both. So I had to, what I could get secondhand, I got. What I could not get secondhand, what I got, I had to buy new. I had to say, okay, if I'm getting new sails, then how do I get a secondhand piece of, like secondhand winches? And it became a balancing act. And what I could not afford was electronics. So I left without any electronics.
So you had no means of contacting anybody?
I had a little VHF radio that was line of sight.
Yeah.
So if I could see the ship, maybe I could talk to the ship. And I did not have GPS, no satellite navigation. So I bought a sextant, and I bought a book, and I sailed away. And don't ask me where I was for the first 7 to 10 days. I was reading that book trying to figure out how to use the sextant. And that's when you measure the angle of the sun to the horizon. People like Chichester, people like Magellan and Ernest Shackleton, they'd used this for 500 years to navigate. That's what I ended up using. And on that first trip, which was to Europe, for a transatlantic race, I ended up hitting myself on the forehead with the boom, split up on the eyebrow. I don't have a distress beacon, I had no medical kit. I used a clothes peg to put my forehead back together. Finished it like that. And that is the way I had to survive.
No medication, nothing at all?
No, didn't have.
Were you scared? Should I ask you that? Were you scared?
Yeah, I was scared of not finding a solution.
Oh, okay.
Because
you wasn't scared of the cut?
Well,
and
the cut happened so fast that you don't have time to think about that. All you have to think about how to stop the bleeding. And I'm gushing blood. And I'm 800 miles from the nearest doctor. So you have no choice. You become innovative out there. Further on that voyage, I hit a container crate. I lose my rudder. My boat is sinking. I'm just after leaving the Azore Islands. I used a steel bucket dragging me behind the boat so I could form some mechanisms of steering. I was heading for England. The winds were wrong with the system I had. I could not lay the English Channel, so I got pushed up the Irish coast. And I ended up in Ireland by default. Never planned to go there, never planned to stay. I lived there for 5 years. Based myself out of Ireland for those years, met amazing people. And the Irish coast is another very tough coast to sail on. And if you learn to sail on the South African coast, we call Cape Town not just the Cape of Good Hope, but it's also known as the Cape of Storms. If you can sail around the Cape waters in South Africa, you can sail anywhere in the world. So when I got to the stormy waters of Ireland and my boat was fixed, I realized I could sail anywhere in the world. And then I did my first transatlantic race, which was from England to America, the 1992 O-Star yacht race. And
is this where you said boat?
In this boat that I had built. And I built a 38-foot yacht. And I got to meet my hero, Harry Mitchell, who was a well-known, famous single-handed sailor. And I met him at that yacht race, and I raced against him across North Atlantic. I hit an iceberg on the northern route in the North Atlantic off Newfoundland, but didn't do too much damage to the boat. I ended up finishing that race. I finished respectable in my class, but Harry beat me. And Harry said to me, now what are you going to do with your life? Now that you've done this race, and that's when I said, I want to race around the world. So the whole focus then shifted to the 1994 around the world race, 27,000 miles, the longest race on the planet known to mankind. And I returned to Ireland to try and find sponsorship for a new boat, was not successful. So I ended up sticking 2 feet onto the back of my boat. My boat was 38 foot, the minimum size requirement for the round the world race was 40 foot. My problem was just 2 foot. Plywood, fiberglass mat, epoxy resin, we stretched the back of the boat, we repainted the boat. I showed up in 1994 at the greatest solo race. And that race was down the Atlantic to Cape Town, and all kinds of dealing with weather issues, no wind in the doldrums, lots of wind into the Southern Ocean, into Cape Town, an amazing welcome. And then the next leg from South Africa was to Australia. And 2 weeks into that leg, deep in the Southern Ocean, I get hit by 50, 60 mile hour winds. My boat is turned upside down. My mast is broken. And I was forced out of the race. Not long after that, Harry Mitchell, my hero, was killed in the race. This race is so dangerous. People die. And so I returned to...
At what age you were when you were...
At that point, I was 26.
Okay.
I was young. And people called my boat the floating coffin. Because I had so little gear. They said, this guy's never going to finish that race. He's never going to make it to the start line. He's not going to survive out there. And they said, look, be glad that you got as far as you did. Count your blessings. But as an adventurer, we keep thinking about the next adventure. So I went back to America, unofficially, with the boat, and then back to England. And then I raced from England back to Newport, Rhode Island, my second O-Star race. This time in the North Atlantic, I get hit by a Russian freighter. Thick fog, couldn't see. Their radar was not turned on, my radar failed. And just 2 ships, we collided in the middle of the ocean. I have a huge hole in my boat, and I spent 15 days pumping. Every hour, at sea. Did not abandon the boat. I fixed the hole as best as I could. The water was still coming in. I would pump for 15 minutes every hour, 24 times a day, for 15 days. I kept the boat afloat. I stayed racing. I finished third in my class.
With all this adventure and all this thing occupying your time, did you find time to eat?
Yes, you make time. I was a skinny...
No, because I'm hearing that all this drama with the boat and what's going on. So you still found time to sleep?
You had to. You have to. And you live in short naps. You live in half an hour, 45-minute nap cycles. You get up on deck, look around, everything okay, you go back down, take another nap. Get up, go and pump the bilges. Get up, look around again, trim the sails, go and fix a meal, go back and take a nap. So you live in a cycle, and you find a routine. And you get into that rhythm of the sea, the rhythm of the waves, and the cycle of when to be awake, when to be sleeping. Like I would sleep mostly in the late afternoon. And then I would take another nap in the sort of around midnight when the body is really shaking itself. And then I'd take another nap after sunrise. And you find these routines at work, but you never sleep for long. And the boat is sailing flat out all the time. You're under autopilot, it's driving the boat, you don't drive the boat. The autopilot drives the boat, the wind vane, and you trim the sails. But that was the training for the 1998 Around the World race. And that race ended up being fairly simple, fairly smooth, because I had so much experience, so much wisdom. And that first leg to Cape Town, no big deal. The second leg, this time, instead of going to Australia, the fleet went to Auckland, New Zealand. The only thing that happened on that leg was I got frostbite. I was so far down in the Southern Ocean, so cold, my boot had a hole in it, water got into my boot, I got frostbite. But that third leg was to sail past the place where Harry Mitchell had lost his life. That third leg was to take me around Cape Horn. Cape Horn is the ultimate, it is the southernmost cape of our planet. It is as sailors, our Mount Everest, our Holy Grail. For centuries, boats have tried to ride Cape Horn. Many of those boats were driven onto the rocks. I was taking on Cape Horn. When I got 300 miles from Cape Horn, I hit a storm that was winds between 70 to 80 miles an hour, hurricane strength. And my boat had no sails up because I'm surfing off these big monster waves. Took all my sails down. Only have my boat turned upside down. We called it knockdown. Then the boat would come back upright because of the keel. You surf off the next wave. The next couple of waves come along, pound you, you're surfing, you turn upside down again. I'm on deck for the first 4 hours trying to see if I can help steer the boat, if I can help navigating through, and I'm wondering, am I going to live? And I'm fighting for my life that night. And every few minutes, that boat is upside down and I'm in the water. And then eventually, there was Cape Horn. I rounded Cape Horn. It was one of the most amazing moments of my life. Looking north and seeing the Americas to the north of me and thinking of all the billions of people who have lived on this planet. And less than 270 of us in the history of mankind have sailed alone around the world via the Southern Ocean in Cape Horn. And here I took a boat, some called the Floating Coffin, to the furthest corner of our world and lived.
How long did that journey take you?
So the race itself
Yeah.
was 9 months from leaving America to returning to America, 195 days, 16 hours at sea collectively, totally by myself.
When all this was said and done, if I'm to ask you, the race itself, what change that has brought to your life? What you got out of that?
There are so many changes. When I was at Cape Horn, I was fighting for my life. If I made one mistake, I was dead. And at that point, I realized this was not even about me anymore. This was in God's hands. With those big seas, I was not in control. And what I learned out of that is, as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, there are times, there are things that are not in our control. We've got to be able to let go, and we have to accept. As a business, if I make a mistake today, I'm going to lose my investors' money, or my money, but that's all I'm losing. I'm not losing my life. So it puts things into perspective. And there are a lot of people who dream of doing something. And they say, I'm going to go and do this one day. Well, you know what? That one day has to have a deadline. That race starts on a certain date. And I've got to be ready. I've got to do all my planning and all my preparation. But when that date arrives, I've got to execute. And if you don't execute, you can never finish. And so many people just dream of doing something and they never execute. We've got to become executors. And then when we're executing, things are going to happen. Things are going to break. I broke a mast. I lost a rudder. I tore sails. I ran out of food. But you've got to adapt. The sooner you embrace change and you learn to adapt, and when there's no wind, you have all your sails up and you hold that tiller and you try and steer the boat, and when you have big bad seas and big bad storms, you sort of shorten down your sail and you adjust your course. Well, that's what life is all about. We have to adapt as society.
We don't have about 3 minutes remaining. Would you do this again?
Absolutely. I'm doing it right now with my family. That's why I'm in Trinidad. But I'm now sailing with my wife. I'm not sailing single-handed. Okay. But someday I will race single-handed non-stop around the world again.
So you are sailing this time, not actually racing?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
But the racing blood is always in you.
Yeah.
You never lose that blood.
Well, Neal, as we wrap up the first part of this interview, I want to thank you very much, for taking time out. And as you said earlier, I made you postpone your departure.
Yes.
I really, really appreciate you coming here. And I must say, I must send out thanks to Mr. Bradshaw, because I would not be talking to you here if Mr. Bradshaw didn't call me yesterday.
Yep.
So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Well, viewers, we have come to the end of the first part of Community Corner here with Neal Petersen, all the way from South Africa. And in this first part, he was really telling us about his life, you know, how he grew up, his mother, what the influence his mother had on him, his disability that he overcome, right? And the adventure of taking him around the world, being the first black man actually, to do it. And I am sure that somewhere in that half an hour we just spoke, there is something out there for somebody to help motivate you, who you might be saying, oh, I can't do that, you know, I have a bad hand or a bad leg. But Mr. Petersen here is living proof that nothing is impossible once you put your mind to it. So we hope that you enjoy this Community Corner, and we ask you to stay tuned to Acts 25 for part 2 of this very interesting interview here with Neal Petersen. So enjoy the rest of the week, and we will see you next week Thursday right here on Acts 25 for part 2 of this intriguing interview.